on to section 17 subsection 5, which talks about block credit. We know that medical insurance is blocked under 17 subsection 5, but there are certain cases also where medical insurance premium and the tax paid on that can be claimed as credit. Can you explain in what cases can we take ITC of those?
This is something which is very close to me, Suresh. I think you have kind of touched upon an aspect which I really am fond of. In fact, if I were to kind of look at this position in terms of how many assessees take credit on medical insurance, they will be very few. And if you were to kind of take who supports that, again there are very few. I will be one of those bad boys who basically tell companies that you can take credit on medical insurance.
This is exciting. In fact, I have been propaganding from many years, 7 years of GST it means, and insurance paid on health employees, I have not availed credit. So more eager to hear as to what are the cases.
No, certainly. So there is a particular perspective which I may want to kind of put on, maybe, and that is what we are wanting to kind of see how it can be tabled and then kind of pushed on to make something which is eligible. Now, if I can just take you back in the pre-GST regime, medical insurance in terms of the way in which the medical tools were there were restricted so long as it is considered as a personal consumption, right? They were, again, department certainly believed medical insurance was in the nature of personal consumption and they denied. Assessees who wanted to kind of take credit, including those which we supported, we have several tribunal decisions which have taken this particular aspect and they have kind of held emphatically saying that, see, it is not personal consumption, it is an obligation which an employer has under the various favorable labor laws. So you had the Factories Act, you had the Shops and Establishment Act, you had the Contract Laborers Act, you had various of the favorable labor laws under which the employer had an obligation to do certain things, and medical insurance is one of them. And since this was done not for a employee but for all employees as general, it could not have been treated personal. It was something which was more of a, that's the term used, obligation by the employer towards the employee. But when GST law kind of came in, they used the word obligation, but they mixed it with something else. So when GST law kind of came in for medical insurance, the medical insurance became restricted generally, but then the exception said that if it was an obligation under any law, and if it was notified by the board, you could take it. Now, certainly board had not notified assessees to kind of take, and obligation under law had a particular terminology. So we were also silent. And fortunately, in 1st of Feb 2019, the condition to notify by the board was removed. So the only condition after 1st of Feb 2019 was that whether medical insurance is an obligation under any law. Now, here is where I bring about a distinction between obligation and something which is mandated. Ordinarily, an obligation under law would mean that it is mandated under law, ordinarily. Right. That's the, so if something is an obligation, why would law kind of state something which is not required? So the assumption is that if law is obligating, means it is mandating. Yes. But certainly choice of words in law also make a play. If it is mandated, means to say that law will say that every company shall provide insurance worth, let's say, 3 lakhs or 5 lakhs or 10 lakhs to an employee or employee family. That is mandated. But if the law says that let's say if you have 200 or more employees, right, you shall take care of the general health care of the employee, right? If something happens in terms of his, let's say, your hazardous or nature of your business, it could be, in fact, IT is also equally hazardous because the kind of thought process which kind of goes in, the kind of stress which kind of comes in, you have instances where, right, heart attacks happen at very young age, right, and they are not those who work only in factories. Certainly work stress is one of those factors, and as an employer, you would want to kind of certainly ensure such kind of liabilities which kind of fall back, because there are several labor laws which cast a responsibility on the employer. And at that time, if he doesn't take insurance, then just imagine the kind of liability, because the kind of cost which you have in terms of medical, which can flow, will be very substantive. So no employer will be in a situation where he'll have something which without insurance. So therefore, be it the pre-GST regime or the regime after GST, certainly employer always has an obligation under those labor laws have not changed, under the labor laws to provide medical insurance. If it was held as eligible in the pre-GST regime, GST, in fact, the way in which the credits have been worded, it is more favorable than the pre-GST regime. So what is eligible under pre-GST cannot become ineligible post-GST because it is only widened.
Do we have a precedent?
Yeah, so there is one. So, so certainly in terms of the interpreting that, yes, between obligation and something which is mandated, here is a differentiation to say that obligation under any law could also mean something which is, let's say, generally done, because you have something which is a custom law. So when you have any employee joining an organization, you will not have a situation where an organization, because an organization of a decent size certainly has medical insurance cover, which is a group insurance cover. So certainly it becomes in that manner an obligation. And the fact that it is customary for any employer to do also becomes a customary law. So, apart from the favorable labor laws, there are many, sometimes assessees come back and say that Factories Act is not applicable to an IT company. So how am I kind of covered that way? So certainly there are, I would say, one decision in the Bombay High Court which says that even in certain aspects an IT and IT enabled service also in some manner, because software development, software being in the way in which it is, there are certain provisions of the Factories Act which becomes applicable. But whether Factories Act or not, like say you have the shops and establishment, you have various of those favorable labor laws. In fact, the social code which was to be kind of coming has a specific mention about insurance. So all of these are intended in a manner which obligates the employer to do certain things towards an employee, and insurance is one of them. So there is where we believe that by virtue of those favorable labor laws, it is still an obligation under those laws that an employer provides. Otherwise, there is no reason why he would want to provide. Because if something happens while work, employer has a responsibility by virtue of those labor laws. He's covering an insurance towards that, and that cover is something which is an obligation under law, which is what we believe. And fortunately, what happened during COVID, on 15th April 2020, the MHA, Ministry of Health Affairs, issued a guidance which said that every establishment shall provide insurance which covers COVID insurance, and it shall cover not only employees but also workers. So that was something which was blanket. So you had a SOP for social distancing, and one of those provisions also mandated insurance which an establishment had to kind of provide. But unfortunately, during that time, each of these guidelines had fresh guidelines kind of coming in, and those fresh guidelines would repeal the previous. So the fresh guideline which came in on 3rd May of 2020, that is, let's say after 18 days, took over the past, right? And the fresh guideline didn't have specific provision as regards medical insurance is covered, but it only said that social security, right, workplace social distancing shall kind of continue. So while social distancing continued, but there was no specific provision about medical insurance. But I mean, you just tell me, Suresh, will there be a guideline or a mandate by Ministry of Health Affairs to have insurance only for 18 days? We can't have. COVID-like situation can come anytime. Yes. So certainly the objective is that COVID-like situation, even now you have cases which are increasing, right? Yes. So government can't wait for a COVID or another COVID to come and then say come insurance, right? So these kind of things we believe are always an obligation which employer has towards his employees, and by virtue of that, it is already kind of eligible. So be it in terms of the favorable labor laws, by virtue of these MHA guideline or otherwise, we believe that certainly medical insurance is eligible for credit. And because we, as you said, precedents, right? Unfortunately, tribunal is yet to be formed. So for many of our clients, who have kind of agreed to our position, we are knocking the doors before tribunal. I'm sure there will be a way where we are able to kind of impress upon. And at that moment, I'm sure hopefully there will be a clarity. But in terms of my viewpoint, we are of the firm view that medical insurance credit should be eligible. And in fact, for many companies which are as exporters, because they can't wait for the decision to kind of come in. So there is a methodology where you could kind of do by intimating to department and availing credit and still being in the four corners of law and not losing an opportunity. Because as an exporter, you have nothing to lose, right? If the credit is considered as ineligible, you can always reverse it. You have not utilized it. So long as you have intimated the department, stated your position, why you believe as eligible, and taken, it could be a good way to kind of salvage, because all of these credits are time bound. And if you wait for the decisions to kind of come in and then take, you could have kind of lost a wonderful opportunity. So credit on medical insurance is something which we believe is certainly eligible.